wonderful, wonderful. I have looked forward to this interview.
Yes, me too. I thank you so much for being so willing and taking your time.
My pleasure. As you know, the KH is the Khe, a sound we don't have in US.
Right, right.
Zikru'llah Khadem.
Zikru'llah. And sometimes we see it with a Z, and sometimes I also see it with a D.
Yeah, sometimes with a DH, sometimes with a Z.
Okay.
I think that Z has been used more often.
Right.
Although H is also correct.
Yes.
So I use Z.
You use
And
Z.
in his signatures, he always used Z, which means mention of God.
Maybe we could start with some early memories. You were born in Iran, that's right?
Yes, I was born in Tehran, Iran.
When you were born, your father was not yet appointed hand of the cause, is that right?
He was not.
Tell me something about growing up in Iran as a Baha'i.
It's been very, very oppressive environment. From time to time, persecution started. And once in a while, they would stop in the interim, but then always back to persecution of Baha'is and the name-calling and the repression. That has been the pattern ever since I can remember, from my childhood to the time I left Iran for higher education in the United States. And after that, it continued with greater vehemence against the Baha'is in Iran. And I remember being in settings of other children and being ridiculed. I remember being in Iranian school systems and being publicly ridiculed by the teacher and by the students. So that was the norm. From time to time on the pulpit, the mullahs, the clergy would go and they would defame the Baha'is. And at those times, the zeal against the Baha'is, the animosity would grow to a crescendo. So that's what I remember from my childhood and teenage years in Iran.
And your memories of your father as you were growing up. I've heard people say his kindness was remarkable.
Well, the qualities in him was his devotion. I mean, his staunchness in the covenant, his devotion to the central figures of the Baha'i faith, and his devotion to the beloved guardian. This was the way he was raised from childhood. They lived in a place, in an enclave in Tehran called Hayat Ba, where many other Baha'is lived. And their home was the center for any traveling Baha'i teacher who would come into town. The likes of Nayer and Sina. Probably know these two individuals, very, very devoted Baha'is. And Naim, the noted poet. They would all come to my grandparents' home. And there in that enclave, there were those uplifting meetings of which I heard later on. And when I think of that, to this day, it impassions. They would go to the basement, something like the cellar of the house, and by light of a single candle, it was all in secrecy. The letters and messages which were received from Abdul Baha at that time were being read and discussed. And just imagine that a bunch of devoted Baha'is set on fire with their passion, sitting around the candle and reading those messages. Then that would set them aflame. It was just like that essence of spirituality that was among them. Because if discovered, they could have been imprisoned and killed. So it was all in secrecy in their own home with some of the notable Baha'is as they came into town and stayed with them and as they left. And this was his childhood, reared by his father and mother and his grandmother, for whom he had, his grandmother was called Bibi Jan, for whom he had a lot of love and devotion because she participated in raising him. And she was one of those lionesses of the faith. She and one other woman, devoted Baha'i, saw it their duty to go and retrieve the martyred bodies, the dead bodies of the martyrs for proper burial. Because there was martyrdom at that time to a great extent. And as these were martyrs, they were thrown down with a lot of disrespect to mutilate them. So she and one other woman would go to the side, fall on these dead bodies and say, "This is my brother, this is my brother."
Oh, that's how they did it.
These bodies for proper burial. So this was the kind of environment he was raised. His father was from Kashan, and his grandfather was the one who first became a Baha'i. So I'm a fourth generation Baha'i. There was a sheikh of Kashan who brought the faith to their village, and there persecution started for the Baha'is. So his grandfather left Kashan for Iran, and then his father, Nasrullah, served Abdul Baha for 4 years when Abdul Baha was in the cave of Elijah. You remember that story?
Oh, Oh, yes.
Abdul Baha. So that was his background. And I suppose all of that went into the extent of passion which he felt. But very much noteworthy in all of this about my father is that when beloved Shoghi Effendi was then appointed as the guardian of the faith, and that was, a passing of Abdul Baha was in 1921, shortly after, it was in 1925, I believe, that my father wrote a message. In Persian we say arize. I don't know what to say that in English. Arize is a letter that's written from one who is much lower to one who was much higher.
Ah.
He wrote an arize to beloved guardian, pledging his devotion and love for him. And then he received a response from Shoghi Effendi, which actually impassioned that flame to an extent that he could no longer contain himself. And so he wanted to go to the presence of Shoghi Effendi, and he asked for permission to go. The permission was not coming. So what he did is he went to one of the notable Baha'is in Tehran, Haj Ramin, and he said, please, you write a letter to Shoghi Effendi and place a plea that I should receive permission to go to his presence. And this Haj Ramin, knowing the state of my father's state, thinking that this young man is so irrational, he wrote a letter. And then at the end, he added a postscript. If you permit him to come, fine. But if you don't, so much the better.
Very diplomatic.
Diplomatic. He didn't know what to do with him because just could not be contained. The response did not come. He could no longer wait. And then he said, well, maybe if I go to Iraq, if I go to Baghdad, to be closer to my destination,
Yes.
I'll wait there and I'll go there. So he went to Baghdad and no response had come. Then he said, well, maybe I would just get on this in a taxi, what were they called? It was like a bus
Yes.
taxi. Maybe I'll just get on that and go anyway. And so he did. And on his way, he used to tell us that he would constantly say, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? To the point that the other passengers were fed up with him. And so when finally the bus arrived in Haifa next to the house of Abdul Baha, he is where he wants to be. But all of a sudden, the thought dawns on him, I have come here and I have no permission. He didn't know what to do. So when he gets out of this, let's call it taxi, the other passengers, fellow passengers, are just so happy to be rid of him. But Dr. Esliman from the Western Pilgrim House, overseeing, realizes that someone has gotten off this cab and now is heading toward the house of Abdul Baha. So he comes down and greets him, and my father shares his issue, his problem with him. So anyway, they go and knock on the door of the house of Abdul Baha, where Shoghi Effendi lived. And as the door opens, the beloved guardian father hands him the permission.
Oh.
This permission was just going to be mailed out.
Oh my gosh. He was just in time.
Yeah. So after that, of course, the rest of it is history, and his passion grew every day. And when he married my mother, we were surrounded with that. He could not be contained. Our house was the place where many Baha'is came. His special attention went to the Baha'is who lived in south of Tehran. These were the Baha'is who you seldom saw in the meetings. They had their own gatherings and they had special needs. But his attention went to a great extent to these Baha'is. Then he was on the NSA of Iran for many years. On the centenary of the Declaration of the Bab, which would have been 1944, he had a very special assignment given by the beloved guardian to take the Loh Qarm. It was a tablet that was for that centenary to take it to Shiraz so it could be chanted, a gathering.
Oh.
And so that was very close to the war years.
How did things change in your family and for you when he was appointed? He had to do a lot more traveling, is that right?
Yes, before he was appointed, he traveled throughout Iran. But after he was appointed, his assignment, he traveled a lot outside Iran. And that's why the beloved guardian called him Itinerant Hand of God. He traveled outside Iran to all continents. I can't begin to tell you how many places, to many, many countries, under very difficult conditions, sometimes with the two-engine planes to carry on the assignments that were given by him, by Shoghi Effendi. Most of these assignments actually came after his appointment in 1950. 1952
Right.
as the second contingent of Hands of the Cause in Iran. It was an experience to behold. I cannot very well, I have no recollection of that, but my mother says that she was present when a cablegram came in, pointing him as the Hand of the Cause. He was stupefied. He could not believe it. He said, no, this is a hoax. I cannot be Hand of the Cause. I'm not Hand of the Cause. No way. Let's go to Mr. Furutan and tell him that people are sending such messages.
Oh, wow.
And so first he went to his mother to tell her that I received. She said, no, this must be real. Because in a tablet many years ago, there was some kind of premonition about this. Anyway, so then they went to Mr. Furutan, the secretary of the NSA of Iran, to verify whether this was a real, this was actually from beloved guardian or a hoax. After that, his life changed.
Yes.
And I'm not saying in terms of his devotion. His devotion remained at a very high level from the very beginning to the end of his life. But in terms of his assignment, he traveled internationally extensively.
How did this affect the family? Did you have brothers and sisters? How did the family keep together, and how did you keep in touch with him?
Well, when he traveled, we had sufficient care. At times my mother was with us, and at times she traveled with him. My two grandmothers, Mrs. Javid and also Mrs. Khadem, Razia Khanum Khadem, would take on the responsibility. And at that time my father had maids, cooks, and chauffeurs and servants. He was quite prosperous. So these individuals, these family members, simply provided supervision, not the labor, not the hard labor.
Yes.
Although that supervision was hard by itself also. But as a child, what I remember foremost, and due to this day, is his passion.
Yes.
I have not known anyone I have observed. Of course, I could not know anyone else as well as I do my father. So I'm not saying he was unique in that fashion. But for me, he was exemplary.
Do you have any memories of favorite songs or quotations that your father would like to sing or to use?
Well, my memories are different levels. First of all, my father, when he was in the presence of the beloved guardian, mentioned that the youth should memorize. And he mentioned, in fact, memorization of the Book of 32. So when my father came back from pilgrimage, he set out to memorize the entire book of Iran. In the original language, the entire book, as well as many other tablets. So I don't know, in this video they talk about his carrying the original book of Iran to the World Center, and that is true. As you know, the book of Iran was in response to one of the uncles of the Bab had gone to the presence of Baha'u'llah and had difficulty to accept the Bab, his nephew, as the promised one. And so the Baha'u'llah tells him, go and come back tomorrow with your question. So the next day he goes to the presence of Baha'u'llah and with his question. And in the course of 48 hours, Baha'u'llah answers the question of the uncle of the Bab. 48 hours. And all of this was written, transcribed, recorded by Abdul Baha. And Baha'u'llah in the margin adds his notations.
Wow.
So this book was in the family of the Bab, the Afnan. You know, the Afnan is the title of family of the Bab.
Yes.
And so Fatima Khanum Afnan, one of the descendants of this family, finds this book in their possession. So he contacts Mr. Samandari and one other hand of the cause that he has found this book in his possession. So the message goes to Shoghi Effendi that the original book has been found by one of the descendants of the Bab. And they set out, not Shoghi Effendi, but these wonderful individuals who know of its existence, they set out to ask Fatima Khanum for the book. She did not want to give the book. And I understand that. Don't you? Yes. She did not want to give up the book. And Shoghi Effendi very graciously says, you should not force her. This really, do not force her. Do not put her under pressure. But some years after, she says she wants to offer the book for the World Center. And so my father's wish and prayer had been that he would be entrusted with carrying that book, hand carrying that book to the World Center.
Wow.
But he spoke of this wish to no one. And then on one of his pilgrimages to the presence of Shoghi Effendi cable sent this book through Khadem. And so this book on this pilgrimage, when my older brother was also going on the same pilgrimage in the same plane, he relates that throughout that ride, my father constantly came out peacefully. The verses of Iran poured from him, within them, from his memory. And when they arrived in he offers the book to Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi does something to the effect of this unique present. You asked about what would he say? He would just quote from Iran. But he also would quote from Qayyum al-Asma, very moment, his chant in the Arabic from Qayyum al-Asma, which was the commentary
on the Surah of Joseph, yes.
Yes, just reverberate in my mind. He had a lot of memorization. And in the Western world, what he would often in his talk say is, "Oh God, increase my astonishment in thee." I think this is also in Seven Valleys.
Yes.
God, increase my astonishment in thee.
Indeed.
When he reached a point which was unspeakable for him, unfathomable,